In today's interview, I'm talking with Russell Wald. Russell's the policy director at Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, also known as HAI, H-A-I. Russell's role is to bridge the divide between academia and governments. And today's interview, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how that plays a role in our lives now and what that means for the future, and especially how that relates to our democracy and the role technology plays. And we're going to get into deep fakes. We're going to get into the upcoming election and a bunch of other stuff around this topic. It's really fascinating stuff. So listen, watch, and let us know what you think. I am here today with Russell Wald. I've known Russell for a very long time, and he is in the AI space, of which he's going to dive into, obviously. And he's the policy director at the Stanford Institute for, okay, let me take a breath, Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, HAI. I mangled that, so if you can help me with with your title, please.
Yeah, so it is one of Stanford's newest institutes, so it's within the university, and it is looking to bring artificial intelligence across the university and actually become one of the global leaders on artificial intelligence. And it's really important that we named it human-centered instead of just an artificial intelligence institute. And the reason for that is because this is a technology that's going to affect anyone, everywhere, in all walks of life in the future as we go on. And one thing that we wanted to be sure about was that it was inspired by humans, it benefits humans, and most importantly, I feel that it augments human capability instead of replacing humans. And so the human-centered kind of concept is a big thing. And again, this will be a technology that will become ubiquitous like electricity. I think it will change society as we know it and as we continue to. And in many cases, it is now. We just aren't aware of it or fully feeling the complete effects of it. And I think history will look back at some of these points in time and it'll be significant.
And is that unique to Stanford? Like, AI is pretty commonplace at this point, but HAI, is that something that is just happening there, or is everybody kind of adopting the same?
Well, one other thing that I will say that we do that we kind of none of us get it say it's either HAI or we call it HAI. So Stanford HAI is the how I normally refer to it as. But the Stanford has really been a home to a place of exceptional technology and development of technology. And in fact, the term artificial intelligence was initially coined within Stanford. So this is the technologists within Stanford, whether computer science, engineering, management science and technology. There's just all of these various groups within Stanford that are doing incredible work. But the one unique thing about the university is it's really good and effective at bringing in multi-stakeholders within other departments of the university. So what's important about Stanford HAI is the law schools involved, the medical schools involved, humanities, arts, all of these other economics, all these other impactful areas to artificial intelligence. And we think just about the technology. Instead, this is just as important. And so we have this really large ecosystem that we've created. And I'm really happy that we're doing the things that we do.
Awesome. I want to back up slightly and just really kind of baby step us through what is AI. I think there's some confusion, AR, AI, the differences between those technologies. Can you kind of just spell that out for us so we can get a brief understanding and then we could dive in?
So we actually are living in an age of AI now, and we just don't realize it. In some cases, people use that title, the AI part too frequently. In some parts, it's just statistics or some other types of, math tech or computer aspects. But the big thing to note about AI is it is in some cases for the utility in society is it is being used in a way. It's a computer technology program that's being used in a way that in some cases can do things better in an intelligent manner. meaning it can learn from itself. It can it can realize mistakes. And the biggest kind of breakthrough and threshold was the game of Go. And what had happened is Go is much harder than chess. It is one of these just incredibly difficult games. And a human actually played a machine a few years ago. And that was where the machine beat the human. And this was an expert human first. And the machine beat the human and has now been able to subsequently beat the human over and over again. And so what you've seen is now the machine now has a degree of intelligence that did not exist before. And a big part of this is why this is the case is it's been fueled by this massive amounts of data. AI is effective because when you just cram in a bunch of data, and I'm butchering this and making it really simplistic, but it's essentially fueled by a large amount of data that will therefore inform it and help make the decisions that it can faster than in some cases that a human can.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious to the implications of that. Obviously, I think when anything is kind of conceptualized and brought into the world, it's usually because they want to make something better or more efficient or whatever, and don't always see the shortcomings of that. How will this impact our lives? Like from I guess the good, bad, and ugly. Like, how would you break that down?
Yeah, so frontier technologies always have like the unforeseen consequences, or in some cases, people were almost not thoughtful enough to look at the possible consequences that could have come from something. A lot of technologies have dual use capability, and there's a double-edged sword to them. And let me just give you one anecdote: is nuclear technology. It helps energy. It's actually can be much cleaner for the environment. Medical isotopes can be derived from nuclear technology, but at the same time, you have the nuclear bomb that can come from it, right? So to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, a good example would be MRIs today. MRI imaging, it's been documented and shown through studies that now, in some cases, artificial intelligence can more accurately catch something quicker than the human eye could. So let's just say a woman has a mammogram and there's the beginnings of a tumor that the human eye just could not catch. A machine eye has been fed so many images of what a mammogram looks like and what a healthy breast looks like and what a cancerous a breast with tumors would have, that it was able to zero in and specifically see the beginnings of that where a human would not have that capability. That would be one good example of the good. An example of the bad. Facial recognition technology. And I want to be careful too about labeling facial recognition technology as exclusively bad. There are some good cases for facial recognition technology. I'm giving you an example of the bad. UCLA had a program of where they were going to let people in and you were going to gain access to areas that you would be allowed to enter through facial recognition technology and just capturing your face, and you could walk into a door and a door would unlock for you. The problem with that was, and this is the issue of data, is a lot of data can be biased. And if we have legacy biased data, and then it becomes fed in and makes the algorithm from that, what's happening in this particular case is you are essentially, in this particular case, what's happening is it's giving these biased readings, and the biased readings that are coming from this, in UCLA's case, they were a lot of people who are minorities couldn't open doors because it looked like they had a mugshot or something from before because of bad data pools that were in there and actually have racial bias in them. And so a lot of students who would be at UCLA wouldn't be able to do this. And so UCLA had to terminate the program after multiple testings on it. That's a bad thing.
That's like literal doors closing in front of your face.
Like, literally. And in many cases, it was on the basis of the color of your skin, right? So, and it was incorrect. And so that would be part of the bad. Part of the good, part of the ugly would be something in the case of certain authoritarian regimes that are using artificial intelligence to spy on their own people, and in some cases use it so that they can infringe on their rights in incredibly horrific ways. In some cases, one country in particular has used it as a means to help develop concentration camps and keep people in concentration camps. So that would be the extreme end of something that's really bad.
Can you talk about that? Is that like what's happening in China? Is that
like... Yeah, I'm referencing the Uyghurs in China,
yeah.
the minority Muslim population that they have. It's what a lot of experts are referring to as digital authoritarianism, the concept of an authoritarian state using this technology on their own population as a means to monitor and repress them.
I guess it sounds like between authoritarian governments using this technology, the facial recognition example at UCLA, there's biases that are already built into our institutions and our systems, right? There's systemic bias that we're hearing about every day now, right? So it sounds like this technology can compound that. So just first of all, I want to see, is that correct? And then also, is there something that can be done where the technology might be the way out of some of these systems that have been historically biased in that way?
Yeah, so I want to be careful because you're conflating two things. So there is a little bit of, we should separate them. In the UCLA case, and that's the reason of why I said the bad, it's more unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It's not as though people are purposely trying to do this. They just had bad data, which made this a problem for students in this particular case. In the case of digital authoritarians, they are purposely using the technology to repress people. And so those are two separate things. And so they should be handled in two different manners. The first one being the case of bias in all data that helps inform algorithms and creates them, is what I would say being thoughtful, like how we are trying to, with it where I work, bring multiple stakeholders to the table, bring multiple viewpoints, and making sure data analysts are effectively looking at the technology in a way of where they have a diverse group of people. One good example of this is of the medical developments in artificial intelligence, the three primary states of where this is coming from by an exponentially large amount is California, Massachusetts, and New York, right? So all the patient data is coming from those localized areas. Well, that leaves out the rural people within certain areas. That leaves out people in different socioeconomic factors, different weather and chemical impacts that they're affected. And so these algorithms are going to be built on this group of people who live in these three states, but it's still going to impact those people in those other states. So it's not a diverse pool set. So what we need to do is make sure that we have an open mind to diversity of the data. That would be the first thing. The second thing would be related to digital authoritarianism, we need to stand up for what values are and apply values into these systems of saying, this is an ethical thing that is wrong, right? Here we're having the discussion of facial recognition in the US for policing purposes, and many people are saying it is wrong, it should not be applied in this. And that's an open debate that we're having, and that's actually the best thing we can do. Lead by example and explain when something is wrong. There's just a red line for it.
Yeah. No, in an authoritarian government, that's kind of hard to do anyways. But in a government like ours, which should be a representative democracy, how do you do that? Like, who determines what the value is? Like, how do you come up with those goals when there's varying opinion, and now you're bringing the human element into technology to kind of change the course again, right? Like, how do you stop that? Like, is there some other technology that helps kind of keep the human element out of that? Like, how does that work?
You have to have humans at the table. That you have to have a diverse set of people that are at the table that understand the technology from multiple perspectives and angles. And have to be no, not enough right now. So there is a great program that one of my colleagues created, which was called AI for All. And the focus was to make sure that you had high school students that were of diverse minorities, women, just the underrepresented areas of artificial intelligence, teaching them early and inspiring them through summer camps about how to do this. And hopefully they go into a university environment of where they do that. So no, we are playing catch up on this. And it is important, so it will help us get the technology right, because in some cases it's not going in the best directions. And in other elements of the technology, it's giving us a great opportunity, but we have to have a holistic view of that. And so there are attempts to try to do this. And I feel confident that we will get there, and we're having the conversations for it. But as you're building the foundational aspects of this, we need to figure out how to make sure that we are applying it in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Cool. Thanks for breaking it down like that. So think about our world today, kind of the lifestyle that we're all living in and that we're used to now, like, whether we're, getting directions and going somewhere, or, some sort of chatbot technology or whatever. What's a good use case to kind of wrap around AI?
Okay. So I think the big thing is it's being used every day and people don't realize it, right? So a favorite is when I tell people Waze, the driving app, right? Waze is AI fueled. It's telling you go this way and go this way, because what it is using large amounts of data to know that at 5 o'clock, well, pre-pandemic, but 5 o'clock is don't go down on this freeway because, and it directs traffic. Right. So there's a lot of potential that we can get from some of these. And that would be an example. Bots are examples too. I'm saying bots from a positive way of you call and you can make reservations through bots, or you're calling with some kind of digital assistance. Siri is another great example, and Alexa, right? When you go into Google and you type in something and you can't figure out how to spell it or something, but it all of a sudden miraculously appears, that is a perfect example of it as well.
So predictive text is also AI, a version of it.
Yes, it is a predictive part of it. Yeah. AI is good at prediction. That is one feature it has.
Gotcha.
It can be good if the data is there, backs up. One other area that I would say is, again, in that quasi good and bad is something like, for your audience, I think, which will be really interesting, is like school admissions, right? You're applying to colleges and a lot of the stuff. Well, there's the idea that you might be able to remove some of the biases that humans have that they apply to admissions when reading school admissions. And so it might be better to have a machine algorithm review and say, this is the optimal person that could do that, would be a good student in this university. But then at the same time, there is from school admissions is, if you have, again, that legacy bias, people might get denied for certain reasons that would not be by any means fair in that case. And a colleague of mine said this really good in reference to military people in the military. If you were to ask AI who will make the best general, it's probably going to say a white male from West Point, right? Because that's all that existed before. And so that's all that's going to get pulled into this. And so if you were to look at that, that does not mean that is the best optimal features.
And is that, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but like, does that fall in line with cognitive bias? Like, does that play into that?
It's a machine bias. It's not a cognitive bias. I would see is more of a human bias. So I see it as more of a machine bias that's coming from poor data resources.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there a movement to kind of change some of these data sources? Like, is there a way to do that? I mean, how do you do that? Is there a way to retroactively?
Well, there's a movement to train the developers of this technology. As I mentioned in that AI for all comment earlier, the high schoolers, there's a movement to teach people the skills to be able to understand their data source.
And I get the future. I'm talking about, like, we have this giant data pool that has basically been scraped from everything we've done over the last 20 years, right? Like, we're dealing with the pool that we already have. Like, is there a way to to clean that, like to scrape that further, to make sure it's accurate, like, or is it just this is what it is, and until we get a new crop of leaders in this field, this is what we have to deal with? I guess that's the question.
No, I think that there is a degree of where we are seeing a lot of computer scientists are being more thoughtful, and there's a push for that, to be more thoughtfulness. I want to clarify that we didn't say this at the outset. I'm a government affairs person for where I work. I am not a technologist, so I can't speak fully as somebody who's developing the technology. I just speak as somebody who's having to study it and represent it towards international governments throughout the world. But there is a cognizant fact within a lot of people I speak with that they are trying to be much more thoughtful on the design of this and apply it in a way that is being carefully and methodically refining the data in a more effective way.
Gotcha. This is all making a lot more sense to me. I guess, like, because of who we are and what we do at Common Ally, it's about activating young people and getting them involved in politics and civically engaged and understanding the government that represents them and that they are part of, right? So in our demo is primarily Gen Z. So they live online, they spend their days there. Data is something they're very familiar with. So what I'm really concerned about, right, is the threats to democracy and how this plays a role in the upcoming election and about just government at large. So, I know before you talked about Waze, which actually makes a lot of sense now, that puts a lot of like context around AI, but how do we talk about this in the context of our democracy?
Yeah, I think that is first kudos to this platform to be able to reach out to young people to get them involved in politics. I truly don't think that there's anything more important about informing the next generation on civics and what, how they can get involved and what's really important. I do also think that we're kind of at a precipice moment on this technology that we're dealing with, and the future democracy and voter rights and everything that comes from that. So I think this is a really good question in general. Many experts are concerned about the effects of artificial intelligence on democracy as a whole and what that could mean. And let me tell you why. First off, let's just start with the basics of social media, right? These particular areas.
Yeah.
Social medias are kind of like these engines of cognitive bias. They're just essentially keep feeding us everything that we want. And so, like, more broadly, we might be getting too much of what we want. And what I mean about that related to artificial intelligence is recommendation engines, feed, social media, overall marketing. They're designed to keep giving you something that you'll keep coming back for. And so by that, if you were a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, let's just break those two groups up for a second, and you are involved, you have social media accounts and you're getting this stuff, it's this amplification side that comes from it.
Yeah.
And that's a part of artificial intelligence. It's feeding you what you want. It knows what you want, and it knows to keep giving you this. And it creates this kind of tribalistic mentality within us because we have this cognitive bias of not wanting to hear what we don't want to hear, right? We just can shut it off. Let's just tune it out because we can be with our affinity group over here and they're going to tell us what we want.
Yeah. And
they're going to give us what we want. And so this is fueling a lot of this just divisions and making it even worse for us. And the problem is in democracies, there's a problem getting too much of what we want from these systems, but democracy has the valuation of truth behind it. It values the truth because this is what gives the power of the people to make their own choices in this case. So we have these well-functioning societies that have inconvenient truths. You unfortunately might hear something that you don't want to hear, but it gives the people the power to make that decision. Mm-hmm. We start to remove some of these on what is truth and what is not. And that is a kind of a dangerous slippery slope that we're getting into of this is not a true aspect because my affinity group says it's not, and therefore I will have a collection here where I feel good and I feel comfortable. And so this is leading to to extremist groups that are coming from this. QAnon is the perfect example of this. No longer is it some kooky person who had a newsletter that they would mail out to 250 people, right?
Sorry
and they
for
would
sending
keep them
that, by the way.
Thanks. But you'd write your check and you would mail it in, and you would be on their roll to get their newsletter. Instead, now this is fed electronically, quickly, and moves at a much more rapid rate, and it just spawns out. And so once you've liked something, let's just use Twitter as an example. I now see that you've liked that and I've liked it. And it's just this continual amplification process. And a lot of that has artificial intelligence undergirding it and helping it give us what we want. And that's problematic. And it is helping spawning groups like QAnon.
And it's not just the platforms, it's the people who play a role in the platform as well. So advertisers are able to tap into that and hand pick exactly who they want to target with whatever messaging based on what you're talking about. And I think that becomes dangerous as well, because it's just further deepens that feedback loop and that echo chamber. And that's certainly something that we're concerned with and that we see all the time. And I've just, in my personal life, I've seen people literally just go off, like kind of leave the planet, like in a way where, and it's weird too, because I saw something about this recently, how it's kind of come out of the holistic movement, like QAnon, how, a lot of people got into like holistic medicine and like, bettering their lives and meditation, all this kind of stuff, which is great. And then somehow that went into kind of the anti-vax movement. And from the anti-vax movement, it went into the don't trust government. And then like kind of all of a sudden within like 3 months, you're QAnon. And
right.
That's fascinating, because that's all done in this ecosystem that is just, it's not real, right? It's all done online and it's all done through exactly what you're describing. So I think that's something that we really have to be conscious of. Sorry, dog bark. I lost my train of thought as well. I
do want to correct something then, so you can get your train of thought back.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the marketing aspects of this, right, and how it can be hyper targeted, in some cases, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. If I'm going to have to see an ad, I'd rather see an ad for something that's related to me and my age group and my demographic versus Depends undergarments, right? You don't need to see something that's not applicable to you. You'd rather get something a little bit better. But it is that same concept when applied to politics, right, of where it just can shove directly to you in a manner that will inform or misinform you in a particular way.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you corrected that. And I think it's also more of, it's about not trusting experts anymore. It's about feeling that you are the expert in the room. Like with COVID,
right.
Like the amount of people that I know didn't finish high school, let alone get a medical degree, are telling me daily about the intricacies of COVID and how contagious it is or is not. And that, to me, is a very dangerous world. And do you think, is AI like playing a role in that as well? How you are kind of able to find your own truth?
It's the same concept of whether it be COVID and conspiracy theories related to that, or just in general, mistruths on politics, or just this hyper targeting aspect of it. What's happening from this is, if you want, again, the engine of cognitive bias, if you want to believe this, you kind of can get drawn into it. How many times do we have that kooky uncle or something who goes and tells you something and they really believe it? My grandpa's actually a great example of that. He'll say something to me and I'm like, Grandpa, that's not true, Grandpa. And trust me, he's not on any social media, right? He just wants to believe in there's just this goal to want to believe it. What's happening though is they're getting validators.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You weren't getting validation by a whole series of people, but now you can get validation by thousands of people, and in some cases millions of people, that your belief is right, even though evidence might prove otherwise.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
I want to kind of stay in line with that, but also get into like deep fakes a little bit. I think that is obviously kind of like, I feel like it's topic of the year in this category. And it's something that, we see, and like to some extent it's, it's fun. I've seen late night hosts kind of play with it and like, but it's
You
almost
sent me an inappropriate deep fake or two.
I did. I may have done that to myself. I may, um, which is quite fun. But I think because the technology is getting so good and it's almost indistinguishable between what is real and what is not. And also there's no more how fast the news cycle is, I think is another part of this, where before we can kind of watch it, pontificate on it, and then really figure out, hey, let's talk about this. I don't think that wasn't right. Like there's no more time for that. So once it is seen and shot into the world, people latch to that, make their opinion, form it. And then even if later it is disproven, it's done its effects. Right. And I think
Right.
that, bad actors are obviously taking advantage of that now. So can you talk a bit about deepfakes? First of all, like what are they? And second of
Yeah.
all, like what are the pros and cons of this technology?
Yeah. So deepfakes are essentially highly edited videos in a way that appear almost as though they're actually real, and you can't discern the difference between reality of them or not. And what it is the technology referred to as general adversarial networks, GANs. And within that technology, you are able to just distort things. And what's happening is it's becoming much more ubiquitous and more diffuse. So it becomes easier for people to be able to do this. And a great example is, yes, your Instagram doggy ears coming out, or some of these other things, or to the now more sophisticated things of where you start to actually question, a lot of us are, have filters or some things, and some people have editing features that go a little bit further. So think of it as like the ultimate Photoshop, right? Like you can pretty much make something that's not there. From the Motion Picture Association, some of these or Hollywood movie makers, some of this is really great because you can help enhance and make films better films, and you can increase do better things for the arts. The problem is again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's the good of the technology and the bad of the technology, and what happens when people start to use it in a disruptive way. It can, in effect, get back into that cognitive bias reinforcement. So there's a lot of people have been concerned from an electoral perspective the dangers of this in a security environment. Let's just say potentially a few hours before a few days before the election, a deep fake comes out that has Donald Trump saying things he never said, or Vice President Pence saying things or doing things he never did in a negative manner, and could affect the outcome of an election and just sway people's voting, right? It could be something so horrible. This is where when I said earlier, we're at the precipice of a really impactful part towards where we go in society. What will be the regulation of deep fakes? Is a cat out of the bag? Is it too far along where we will not be able to bring this in and have any regulation? Will some young hacker, or not even hacker, just some young sophisticated computer teenager go and make one, and it gets out there in the world, right? Yep. It is important. I want to talk about too the Nancy Pelosi, that infamous video of where she appeared that she was drunk. That's not a deep fake. That is manipulated video in a different way, where they just slowed her down to appear that way. But I have the same concept in terms of what a deep fake could do if it became a national news story, right? And that is really impactful on our elections, and can be, in some cases, disastrous if we can't figure out what happens here. I would take it even a step further in how dangerous deepfakes could eventually get. Let's say you have the president of the United States being beamed into Tehran, Iran, on a manipulated video saying we're on the verge of attack. It's a call to the Iranian people and says, we are on the verge of attacking you. Please, innocent Iranians, take shelter. We have no more choice. We can't deal with this regime anymore. Something like that. In that scenario, well, from a military commanders, the Iranian military commanders might not see anything that would cause alarm there. what if that did push people to have some kind of panic hysteria of where they did start a war because of that, right? Could a video start a war? Potentially, right? And so
Yeah.
I think we need to get a grip on what happens with that technology and what the long-term implications can be, and how is it that we have an understanding of what is truth. And one interesting thing about this is while it's artificial intelligence that will that's creating this, some people are saying the defense to this is artificial intelligence, because it might be the only thing that could discern whether something is fake or real.
Got you. And are there good cases of them doing that now? Like, how fast is that process? Like between like the Nancy Pelosi video and then when we get to react to it?
So there's, I think it's really only that I am aware of to some extent that's publicly available is some U.S. national security institutions are trying to look at the intelligence community finds this to be a really important thing. And so they're looking at it because they don't want to be put into a position of being the verifier of truth, but they need to verify their truth for themselves. In this particular case. And I just read an article this week that US Special Forces themselves are looking into using artificial intelligence to be able to detect whether something is a deep fake or not. The technology, I don't think, is there enough yet for it to be, you can discern by your eye on some of these whether something isn't fully there or not. But we probably are only a few years away from it. We will not be able to tell ourselves.
Yeah. But it's also like, if you combine that with already kind of like being in your own like tribalism bubble where you kind of want to believe it anyways, and then you see it, like that might be that like just that thing.
And studies show it's really hard to take back disinformation or misinformation pieces. Once you've heard it, the time count is once you've heard it, it's already made an impact. If someone came back and said 2 minutes later, that's not true, it still had an impact on you then. But as time goes on, that impact to be able to correct it becomes much harder.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier is like because the news cycle is moving so fast, they're aware of that, obviously the psychology behind that. And I think it fits a frame and it fits your subconscious. So once it's in there, like that's kind of planted. And that's, I think, the key of using this type of technology as a weapon. I think in contrast to, what you can do from the bad actor standpoint of this, I sent you the other day that I think now this put it out, but Change the Ref, which was started by the parents of Joaquin Oliver, who was shot and killed during the Parkland massacre. They brought him back, right? Using this deepfake technology. They also, I forgot who they worked with, but they worked with someone to actually capture his voice. So when he was saying this was actually his voice kind of generated as well. And they were doing this to say, I was killed a few years ago and still nothing has changed. Like, let's vote around gun violence issues, right? Like, so they were using this technology to obviously make a very strong message. And in some way, I mean, almost like bring their son back to kind of advocate for how he was taken. Like, it was very powerful. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when you sent me that was what a conundrum, right? Powerful, could be problematic in the future, and also gets into this just moral and ethical side. We might be able to get to a point where the technology and the voice recognition and the voice kind of replacement side, we might be able to almost find solace in being able to go on our computer and have a conversation with a loved one that has passed, and you are having a conversation with what is really a machine, but it's bringing you some comfort. That has a whole lot of moral implications and thoughts that just are huge. And this is why a lot of philosophers and ethicists need to be at the table on what these long-term aspects are. The ad itself was incredibly impactful if you understand what's happening within the ad. I think, the grief of having to lose your child, but try to do something positive with this technology. I think, there's some merit there. but I do have concern about where it could go and how far we can go with this and what it can do. And so for me, that when you sent that, that was an eye opener in terms of the fact that this is the pathway we're on. We need to ask ourselves these moral questions of, is this the right pathway? Is it legitimate? You know, when it comes to school shootings, I don't think anyone's going to stand up and raise their hand and say they're for school shootings, right? So I think, you know, we can find common areas there. But there's a lot of challenges with all of these frontier things. And so I think this is the kind of conversations you and I are having right now need to be happening more often with friends and at the dinner table and with families, because it's changing so rapidly that it might get ahead of us if we don't know how to properly think about it and what it means.
Yeah, and I'm glad you framed it like that, because I was excited to have this conversation too, because I need to educate myself, but it's hard to like have that conversation with friends and family where the technology itself is just so confusing, right? I think
Right.
most people won't, and it will be to our own detriment if we don't proactively get involved in this conversation and start understanding it. Because even, you know, the app that I use to send you ridiculous deepfakes of myself,
Which is not a good, you should, for security reasons,
I
but
know.
we'll get onto that another
I'm
time.
completely compromised.
Yeah.
But like, because it is, I bring it up only because, not to just out myself, but it's at the consumer level right now, right? Like people are playing with this casually for $2, where it's like, that's funny. I'm Gwyneth Paltrow today, right? Like
it's at the consumer,
like,
at the consumer level, but it's also, you are being used to enhance it.
Course.
Every time you use it, it makes the technology better
and that's
for
what
them.
I'm saying.
So you are part of
that latter part is lost on us, right? It's lost on the people using it right now. And I think that's the advantage of people who really see this technology as almost a weapon, because there's players unbeknownst to them who are feeding into it, right? So the fact that the app store is already littered with these, you know, some good, some bad versions of this, but probably all of them going to these data sets and the technology, like it's kind of scary, right? But I think it's going to be hard to reverse it or correct it or insert ethics into it when you already have consumer buy-in using a technology they know nothing about, right? Like that's
right. And
scary.
And I don't think people are fully aware of the implication of the use of their data, and so we need to be more judicious with it. But it can't fall exclusively on the consumer. And there are governments do need to step up and determine what needs to happen. There needs to be regulations and rules of the road so that we can make sure that we're being careful here. The hard part is a lot of technologists aren't in government to be able to help governments get there. I don't know if you saw the infamous Mark Zuckerberg hearings, right? Like,
oh my God.
You watch the
WhatsApp and how do I get onto the FaceTime?
Well, you know what I tell people about that is, as if you look at some of those questions that come from members of Congress, the first questions are actually fairly good. It's the follow-up question that becomes difficult because it's hard for a lot of them to follow up. And it's nothing against them. You know, a lot of Congress is older. A lot of the younger generation members of Congress come through and they ask more sharp questions on some of these things because they aren't just learning before the hearings. They've actually been using the technology for a large portion of their lives, right? So
they're not personally asking how to break their password and get into their phone. It was like an IT session. It was hard to watch. Like, how do I fix it?
But it is important for our governments to be able to come to a conclusion on, not come to a conclusion, but at least create a framework and a pathway particularly for the protection of our data. And the value of our data is worth much more than we openly know within society.
Of course. And that's like the future of our company is kind of built on that, on data ownership, data privacy. I also think that's just the future of data. I think that you will be in the driver's seat of that. And what that looks like is to be determined. But, you know, you have Gavin Newsom trying to do the data dividend, you have GDPR, you have all these different, like, data privacy is going in that direction where not only do you own it, but you should be, you know, compensated for it when it goes somewhere else. You know, that is a future that we certainly want to be a part of at Common Ally. But how are these two things tied? Like, is data privacy and data ownership also kind of linked into this? And some of the changes we see coming, where even Apple, right, with their new release, the privacy changes they're going to have coming out in January. Is that because they're anticipating the types of things you're talking about, or are these unrelated?
I do think that big tech is becoming more prepared for potential regulations, and they're trying to plan for that. But I do think that but I do think we will in the near future have a federal data privacy law. And one reason for this is because you have GDPR, which you just mentioned, which is the European um, set of data privacy regulations that was created a few years ago. But you also have California's strong data privacy law. And you will also are starting to see not just California, but all the other states create data privacy issues. And this means a lot when you're downloading an app, or when information is being collected off your phone, and depending on what state you're in or you live in, and how that could affect it. So there is an important thing here to note, that I think, will be a greater national dialogue around data privacy. I feel this is a really good thing. I do think a lot of your Common Ally, younger participants and followers should get as involved as possible in this. The future of this national dialogue, I think, will be contingent on, you're going to have California, which will be a leader in this particular area, just because they already have a pretty strong existing data privacy law. But all the tech platforms have to accommodate all these laws. And so I think ultimately you will bring a federal national type of standard that will help guide this.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, it has to probably correct some of the issues that GDPR has. In some cases, GDPR has helped make the large tech companies stronger. And it's quite nuanced and a long discussion. It's probably a whole nother separate discussion. So you have to do some correction there. And so if you had one baseline federal law that answered those questions and effectively was able to deal with that, you would be able to have something that could be global in that sense. If the European market would pick it up and kind of correct some of the areas. But Europe's a little bit more forward leaning on this area. So we would have to be able to match Europe to some extent for them to be willing to adopt.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with it too, because you see a lot of like statewide movement on this, and you see a lot of private business and big tech moving on this, obviously, but I'm not seeing anything coming out of the administration or coming from a federal level of just like, and I don't know, maybe is there and we just don't see it. I just feel like we're behind from that standpoint.
So I think that this is it's not just, I think, going to be an administration area. This is obviously going to be an act of Congress signed by the administration to be able to get there. In order to truly get there, given all the interest groups and everything that needs to be done, we all need to come and have a seat at the table to talk about what the value of our data is, what it means, what the overall impacts will be. The more we have of an informed citizenry, the better it will be. So, there's a lot of things in the arts right now that are helpful. A movie that I'll give a quick plug for that I highly recommend. I think it comes out on Netflix next month. It's called Coded Bias, and we did a special screening of it. That was really good. And I think, what is it? What's the new, the big one on Netflix now? The Social Network, is it?
Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're finding ways that people are starting to get a little bit more informed, and they need to read up on this and become as fluent on it as possible, so that when we do have these national dialogues, they understand what the implications are, and so that you can ring up your senator or ring up your member of Congress and say, support this bill or don't support that bill, or whatever that might be.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So I'd like to kind of close on what we do here at Common Ally, right? And what brings you to us today, right? The reason why, like, educating, activating young people is just in the ethos of what we do, right? So there is something to being a Common Ally that we think is vital to saving our representative democracy. While there might be some people who feel like we just need this to go complete blue wave and it should always be like that. Like, that might be comforting right now when you are looking at something that is a red wave, but for democracy, that's dangerous on both sides, right? So I think there's merit to needing to be able to bridge that divide and reach across the aisle within reason, of course, but we have to be able to have a little bit more purple. So what is your take on that? What does being a common ally mean to you?
I think society is constantly on a pendulum, and sometimes we swing certain ways, and sometimes we need to be drawn back the other way. And it just depends on the moment. So I love when people refer to as conservatism or socialism or something like that. We're always a little bit swinging between both of those. The important part of it is I think the environment you're fostering of this listening, being thoughtful and understanding, and knowing you can't have everything, and that there has to be a kind of a moderation and a cohesiveness to live together. You don't have to love your neighbor, but you do live next to your neighbor, and you both kind of want to make sure that there's something, an asymmetry to living in a cohesive environment. It's the same concept here of finding ways to work together towards what are our common interests. I said at one point in this, how democracy has, to live in a democracy, that you have to absorb and deal with inconvenient truths. You have to accept the truth on certain, a validated truth on certain things. And even if you don't like it, you kind of do have to accept it. How is it that you can make positive change and do things for the better are two separate things. But not accepting things is something that can't be done. Having conversations with others, listening, hearing, learning is really, really, I think, a positive thing for society to do, particularly young people that will set the agenda of what goes forward.
Thanks, buddy.
My plan.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.